Revelation 836. From the 30th of March 1939. Adaptability. Activity urge. Awakening the Spirit of God. All spirit out of God has the ability to adapt, and is therefore also able to work differently in every form which encloses it, that is, the activity of the Spirit always corresponds to the task which the respective form has to fulfill on earth. Therefore the Spirit carrier, the outer form, must likewise carry out a constantly changing activity to serve the spiritual in itself thereby, and to fulfill also the living conditions of the individual beings intended in the creation. Indeed, a similar activity can often be determined with the different small living beings, but the spiritual from God brings a certain order into every activity, and this is in particular also his spiritual activity, that exactly this order is produced and maintained in all of creation, while without this, an incomparable confusion and arbitrary use of this power would result only in an indescribable chaos in creation. The urge for activity of the different living beings is not always equally strong, because also the spiritual power enlivening them is of different strength, and therefore also the same lively ability is not inherent in the beings, as long as the spiritual substance does not stand in the same size relation to each other. Only the human being has in his outer form also a completely identically formed soul, which is only different again in itself exactly by the spiritual maturity of the human being, which is again only a consequence of the awakening of the divine spark, the Spirit of God in the human being. Spiritual substance is everything that animates matter, and therefore forms the soul of man after long wanderings of innumerable soul particles through innumerable embodiments. The Spirit of God, however, is only now put into the perfectly formed soul and must now be awakened by the will of man, that is by his own conscious cooperation, and completely unite with the soul. This is the spiritual task of man on earth, which is completely separate from the earthly activity, because the latter has been left to man on earth in such different ways, while the spiritual activity, the awakening of the divine spirit, is the destiny of every man, and which is also completely independent of the respective earthly activity, which gives the same possibility for maturing and uniting with the Spirit of God slumbering in it. Spiritual maturity can therefore never be made dependent on the earthly task, but every man can contribute in every situation of life to his inner shaping and therefore also be responsible for it. Amen.